Martin, over time, you've taken extraordinary risk. How do you prevent yourself ending up having the same fate as Michael Collins by making peace?
Well, I don't go to bed at night worrying about that. I don't get up in the morning worrying about that. I am an elected leader of the people of Ireland. I have duties and responsibilities. And I'm not afraid of the reality that there are people out there who are hostile to the peace process. If I was afraid, I wouldn't go out my front door in the morning. I go out my front door every morning. I get up at 5:30 a.m. I'm usually on the go into Belfast, different parts of the country, until 10 o'clock at night, and I come back. And I live in the heart of the Bogside, and I have fantastic neighbours, and I'm surrounded by people who are overwhelmingly supportive of the peace process. But yes, there are a small number of people who are unrepresentative, who believe that they have the right to destroy and everything that we've built up and plunge us back to the past. Well, that isn't going to happen. And if some of us are going to lose our lives defending the peace process, I'm prepared to do that. I'm not going to be intimidated or frightened by anybody.
Martin, you briefly mentioned the Good Friday Agreement. Why do you think at that time it came about? You had this incredible seat as the chief negotiator. Why do you think, after all these years of conflict, it came about? Why do you think the British, why do you think the parties were ready at that time to take that step?
Well, the roots of the Good Friday Agreement lie in two documents which my party produced a number of years prior to the Good Friday Agreement, 8-9 years. One was called Scenario for Peace in Ireland, and the other was called Towards a Lasting Peace in Ireland. And in the late 1980s, it's no secret, it's on the public record that we in Sinn Féin were involved with a number of people. Gerry Adams was talking in a very detailed way with Father Alec Reid. John Hume then joined those discussions with Gerry Adams. I was charged by the Sinn Féin leadership to make a link to the British government, which I did do, and met with a representative of the British government just before Margaret Thatcher left office in Downing Street. And I believe that she was aware that this contact was made. For me, anyway, how it came about was because, quite a number of very senior generals within the British Army, even at the height of the conflict, conceded in a number of theses that they did, that they could not militarily defeat the IRA. And of course, a lot of Irish Republicans, could smile at that and think that this was a great thing. And of course, for people who supported the IRA, it was a great thing. But it raised important questions for me. The important question was, well, if senior generals in the British Army believe they can't militarily defeat the IRA, do I believe the IRA can militarily defeat the British Army? And if the answer to that is the same answer that the generals gave, then an awful lot of soul searching had to be done in relation to how the conflict could be brought to an end in a way that saw inclusive peace negotiations. And so Gerry Adams and I were very proactive within Irish Republicanism, trying to bring about the ceasefire, which eventually we achieved in 1994. Some people mistakenly think that, you go into a room and you talk to 6 or 7 people and convince them. It wasn't like that at all. You had to travel the length and breadth of Ireland and talk to people in every county and won people over to the argument that a ceasefire at that time would set in place a chain of events which would mean that all parties, including the British government, who had said previously they would never speak to the IRA, and unionist politicians who had said they would never speak to the IRA, to eventually come to the negotiating table. So the ceasefire happened in 1994. The leader of the Unionist Party, the largest Unionist Party at that time, James Molyneux, now Lord Molyneux, amazingly described the IRA ceasefire as the most destabilising event since partition. So you just think about that for a minute. And that suggested to me that there were some people within the higher echelons of politics who were actually afraid of peace and afraid of the change that peace would bring. And so the ceasefire came, the loyalists followed the IRA ceasefire some time later, and all roads led to the negotiating table. An absolutely critical factor in all of that, of course, was the general election in 1997, when Tony Blair was returned with an overwhelming majority. And we were involved in an engagement with his people. And it was obvious to us that we were dealing with a British Prime Minister, at long last, the first British Prime Minister in the history of Ireland's relationship with Britain, who was serious about trying to bring about peace negotiations. And of course, during those negotiations, particularly the week of Good Friday, one of the most amazing conversations I was involved in at that time was in a room with 4 people, myself, Gerry Adams, Tony Blair, and his Chief of Staff, Jonathan Powell. Whenever Tony Blair said he had read a number of history books about the situation in Ireland, and he conceded, and this was very important for me, and these are his words, not mine, that the British government were as responsible for the mess that was the north of Ireland as anybody else. And of course that was, hugely important. And he made, and I have differences with Tony over his foreign policy strategy after that, but he made a very remarkable contribution to the search for peace in Ireland. And I think that if he hadn't become involved in any other enterprise, that would have been his legacy. But unfortunately, that has not been the case.